How could it be that a civilization as advanced as the Ming Dynasty, a dynasty that saw 200 ship armada led by Admiral Zheng He crossing the Indian Ocean, making its way to East Africa, a trail of tributes towards the emperor made in its wake? How could such an empire, lasting over 300 years, be conquered by a civilization and peoples who only 3 years previous to conquering China lack even a formalized writing system? How could this happen? The central focus of Ray Huang's 1587, a year of no significance. Welcome to Sino Lit. Ray Huang really does an excellent job of digging down into the detail here in this book and getting to the roots of how it was that such a thing could happen. The first point argued by Ray Huang is that by 1587, the Ming Dynasty had already lasted 200 years. This led to some things becoming fossilized in their ways, as opposed to the dynamic forces that led to the beginning of a dynasty. Often historians and theorists talk about the cyclical nature of Chinese dynastic history, with the dynasties starting off with energy and enthusiasm and dynamism and new ideas, and ending with a terrible, corrupt, decrepit system that leads to its decline. And usually there's an emperor at the end who symbolizes all of this, who usually gets involved, gets himself lost inside the pursuits of women and drink and hedonistic pleasures. This is something that repeats throughout Chinese history, at least in the way that people view it. An example of this is given by Ray Huang, that the first emperors were out on the horseback in battle very often, involved on the front lines of building their empire. And later on, in 1587, the emperor was a Wan Li emperor. And he, in fact, never leaves the Forbidden Palace compound in his lifetime, other than a few times to view his own tomb that was being built. And in many other ways too, the Wan Li emperor ticks some of those stereotypical end of dynasty emperor boxes with his obsession with a particular concubine of his. Ray Huang also does an excellent job of showing how the whole system, being reliant on the emperor as it was to make major decisions, became so stuck in how it was unable to adapt to. One time the emperor was asked how to deal with rebels in a province, and he feigns that he's feeling sick and he cannot continue the meeting, and you guys would be best to decide this. The fact of the matter is that major decisions like this were referred to the emperor, and any civil servant taking any major step in any direction to deal with a problem would be to blame if the situation went wrong. Therefore, it's fully understandable why the civil servants may not have wanted to make strong decisions on how to deal with things. The emperor, on the other hand, was seen as infallible, and any decision the emperor made wrong wouldn't be viewed in such a way as being responsible. The problem would have lied with the execution of the decision rather than the decision itself. The second half of the book focuses on boots on the ground and uses two examples to show how the empire was in decline. The first example is the general Qi Guang, a general tasked with fighting off Japanese pirates on the eastern seaboard down in Jiangsu and Zhejiang, around modern-day Shanghai. And the tools at hand were a mixture of pike, bamboo stems used to sweep away and obscure the vision of opposing soldiers, and primitive 200-year-old muskets. Now, this general did very well with what he had and ended up fighting off the Japanese pirates, but he wasn't rewarded and ended up being sent out to the Great Wall in what you might call a dead-end job. This goes to show how the empire was in decline, where it didn't even reward successful generals. The second example of this dynasty incline is another side of the boots on the ground, that is, the civil servants themselves. The example given here is one of Liu Ji. He is the most significant philosopher of the Ming Dynasty. Just to give some context to this, civil servants were expected to be moral exemplars of Confucianism. They were expected to be symbols of the purity of the dynasty. At the same time, many of the civil servants on the lowest grades were paid subsistence lifestyle wages. It was open knowledge that many of them took bribes. Liu Ji was the fly in the ointment. He openly talked about how civil servants transgressed the rules, and acknowledging the unspoken rule that civil servants took bribes. Just looking over my notes here and thinking how to summarize best Liu Ji and his philosophy. Well, I really found him to be quite an enigma, and I couldn't possibly summarize his philosophy in a pithy quote here. A book to be banned and a book to be hidden were two of the names of his works. In a way, he was very self-aware, and he knew what he had to say was not something that people wanted to see or hear. And this is one of Ray Huang's most interesting criticisms. Lots of great value can be found in the Confucian classics. However, they're texts about individual development, and they're not supposed to be applied to life officially. And that is what the dynasty did. It expected civil servants and talked about them openly as exemplars and symbols of Confucian moralism. By focusing on everything from the court intrigues to the boots on the ground reality of soldiers, generals and philosophers and civil servants, Ray Huang really builds up a detailed picture of the Ming Dynasty and how it operated, and shows why it was in many ways inevitably a dynasty in decline. And only 50 years later, in around, I think off the top of my head, around 1650, the dynasty falls to the Manchus, who were invited in to help them deal with another rebel problem,